How much do college coaches and scouts value high school stats? I was having an argument with someone I know about it, and he said most of the people taking the stats don't know. I can tell you that most coaches look at high school stats as highly suspicious, and even the summer ball stats. Because and I can tell you this just from coaching at Wesleyan now in high school. Like a lot of balls that are put in play that should be called errors are called hits, and vice versa on the pitching side. So it's like the stats are not going to be 100% accurate to like what actually is going on. And again, when you're looking at high school stats, you really don't know. All right, is he just like hitting bolts all over the park? Is he is he hitting lasers everywhere, or is he hitting a bunch of like dying quails that are just falling in because the high school defenses are terrible, right? And I can tell you just from like the first 5 games of our season, we swept a doubleheader on Saturday, so we're starting to play better. But there's a lot of hits that kids get in high school that are not hits at the next level. So like the high school, again, a good indicator is like if you're hitting over 400 or 450, like that's a good indicator that you're legit, right? But if you're getting recruited by a D1 school and you're hitting like 315 in high school, that's a red flag for me as a coach. And that's how a lot of coaches take it. How to take stats. Oh, the people that do the stats don't know how to take stats. He's going to introduce me a few scouts at our next game to ask them the question. Yeah, exactly. A lot of them don't know. I'll give you an example. One of our guys hit a ground ball up the middle, and the shortstop slid and it hit off his foot. So, like, as soon as a defender goes to the ground, it's considered, he's having to make more than kind of routine effort to make the play. It's a hit. So if you see a shortstop go to the ground or an outfielder go to the ground to make the play and he doesn't make it, it's a hit. Well, they gave it an error. So we had to get that changed. So it's like, a lot of the people doing the stats have no idea, really have no idea how to judge a hit versus an error in a lot of the situations. And that's true even in college. Like Andrew Clausen, who's the SID at Georgia Tech, when I would call the Georgia Tech games, if it was a tight play, he'd make the original judgment, and then the booth where we call the game is right next to the press box. He'd open the window into the press box and he'd say, "Hey, Kyle, what do you got on that?" Right? Because he knows, he's like, he's got a pretty good idea, but he's like, I want to hear your opinion. Like, is that a hit or an error? And a lot of times I'll say like, I think you're right there. But sometimes I'm like, I think that's a hit. Like the guy made a lot of effort. It's a tough play. So even at the college level, a lot of SIDs are like, they're going to make mistakes too. But in high school, it's way more often. Buck B, even in good PG tournaments with their scorekeepers, there's always a strong bias to calling almost everything a hit, so inflates offense and negative on pitching stats. Yeah, exactly. Offensive stats in summer ball, again, like coaches are not really like, they're looking at it, right? But they know they got to take it with a grain of salt because it's not like it ain't the big leagues. It ain't a big league scorekeeper that's putting down those numbers. Last fall, we had one PG guy who actually scored how you were supposed to. I saw a parent almost fight him over it. Sad. Yeah, and that's why it's done like that, Buck. Like that's a great point. Is that a lot of the people making these judgments on stats? One, like if they're a parent, their son, it's like a hit every time, and they don't want to deal with like the flack from other parents. So they're like, oh yeah, it's a hit. Like they're going to call it down a hit, or you know what? That was an error. So it's unearned runs now. So it's just like, again, it's like a college coach is going to look at your high school stats and your summer ball stats. They're just going to take it with a grain of salt. So again, it's just like coaches know that what they're looking at generally when they go watch a kid play, they're going to look at his numbers. I mean, if you're like hitting 150 in summer, they're like, hey, that's tough. But they're just looking at, again, like I told you guys, like, does this hitter look like he has an idea at the plate? Does he look like he's got an approach? Is he? It's his. He's the one in control. He's swinging at pitches he wants to swing at. He's not swinging at pitchers' pitches. He's not chasing out of the zone. He's putting the ball in the barrel consistently. Like, that means way more than like, oh, he hit this in high school. Jess, I won't send my kid to another PG event. Watch my son last year. Kids played in the game wherever they wanted to, had a PO play right field. They gave this kid a triple that should have been an out. Yeah, and that's the other sad thing, is that there are a lot of teams. There are a lot of teams that go into these perfect game tournaments, and you're like, what are they even doing here? Like, this is supposed to be competitive baseball, and these kids like don't even play in their high school team. Perfect Game wrote about it in a write-up on the kid. Yeah, he hit a triple to right, and the guy fell over. How off do you really think the batting averages really are? I mean, it's hard to say, but generally I think like, yeah, 0.5 is probably right. And the other thing is this, Canes, is like the defenses in high school are terrible. So the range of your average high school shortstop is way worse than your average power four shortstop. The range of the outfielders is all way worse. The routes are way worse. So just in general, way more balls in play will be hits in high school. So again, if you're looking at, I mean, let's for example, in my career in high school, I hit 455. Like my freshman year, I hit 340 at Georgia Tech. My junior year, I hit 360. So like that's a pretty good estimate right there. It's like it's going to be 100 points different or more. With what you did in high school. Now, again, it's a little bit different now because it's a better offensive climate. So when I was playing, it was like dead ball era. Offensive numbers were way down. So I was probably an outlier in that 100 point differential compared to some of the guys I played with, where it was like closer to 200 points. But now in this era, it's probably closer to that 100 point differential on average or higher. So like just what you hit in high school, you're going to hit probably 100 points or more lower than you did in high school in the college game. So again, if you're hitting like 320 in high school, doesn't mean you're going to fail every time at the next level, but like that's a red flag for a coach. If you think, oh, I think this guy's a good hitter, but it's like, why is he hitting 320 in high school? Unless you're playing in just a elite region that has just a bunch of really good arms or something like that. But again, think about it like this. A lot of the pitchers that you're facing, like this is what I tell guys all the time, is you may be facing I'll give you an example. There was a guy in our region when in high school who was committed to Clemson. So you're like, oh, I'm facing a guy who's a Clemson commit. Well, he never really pitched at Clemson. So like I'm hitting off of a guy who like really didn't even get innings at Clemson. So it's not the same as I'm like getting a hit off of a Clemson starter or like a go-to arm out of the bullpen for Clemson. So like a lot of parents make that mistake as well. They're like, well, he got this hit off this commit. And it's like, yeah, that might be a good sign. And it is generally a good sign. But that guy may end up not really getting any at-bats or any innings for the team he's committed to. Our center fielder hit 470 in high school. He also played on a 250-foot field side to side. Yeah, and that's the other thing in high school. The fields are smaller, so guys are going to hit more home runs. Balls that are home runs will be outs at the next level. And again, like the gaps are smaller, so it's just there's just way more hits around the field if you're a high school player than when you're in college. Our center fielder hit 470 in high school. Yeah, so I mean that's a good sign, right? Like for example, I went to a private school in Atlanta, and we played a bunch of the other private schools in our region who all had like really good players on their team. So though we were Class A, we were like the lowest division in the high school. You would be like, oh well, it's Class A. Well, you're playing against I'll give you an example. Like one of the starters we played against pitched to Georgia Tech and played first base at Georgia Tech. One of the starters, again, was one of those Clemson guys who he didn't get a lot of innings at Clemson, but he still was, he's a lefty throwing mid-high 80s. And then another lefty who pitched at Georgia Tech that I was teammates with, who was a really good pitcher in his career. Georgia Tech just running into and out. I don't know what they're doing there. He hit 470, but he will likely hit 180 to 220 for us this season. That's why I said I can see a whole 200 to 250 drop with some players, if not most freshmen.